So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
When did you become a police officer and why did you become a police officer?
Okay. So I graduated from Hereford High School in 1976, and for some reason I decided I wanted to be a police officer. I don't know why. I did not realize that there weren't female police officers. I should have known because I used to watch all the cop shows. You had Dragnet back then, Perry Mason, Adam 12. And it never dawned on me that there were no female police officers on all those shows. And I grew up with 3 brothers, so I never thought it was sort of strange, probably, that I would want to do that. And none of my best friends told me that they thought it was strange. And the funny thing is, one of the reasons I wanted to be a police officer, they were all going to college and, going to cool jobs, careers, but I thought I could never sit behind a desk because I'm a very outside person. And I was riding motorcycles already by then, and I thought, well, if I was a police officer, I'd be not behind a desk. I see those guys, and they're riding around police cars on TV. I never even met a police officer up here. I mean, we're in the boonies, and nothing ever happened, as my daughter would say, out here. So when I was graduating from high school, my dad said, well, honey, what are you going to do, once you graduate? And I said, I want to be a police officer. And then I pretty much left it at that because I had no idea how to become a police officer. And one day, my grandfather came up from the city, and whenever he came up, Dad would take him sightseeing because we live in the country out here. And he said, honey, get in the car. We're going to take your pop-up and we're going to go sightseeing. Well, he drove right from my house in Hereford down to the local police station, which is Cockeysville. I didn't even know he knew where it was. He pulls into the parking lot and he tells me, go in there and find out how to become a police officer. I didn't even know I wasn't old enough. I was 18, you had to be 21. So I don't know what these guys were thinking when I walked into this police station. There's an 18-year-old little girl, and it's like, excuse me? And I was very shy. You can ask my friends. Back then, I was not the outgoing one of all my girlfriends. I mean, I wouldn't talk to people if I didn't know them. So I'm thinking, if I don't go in there, my dad's never going to leave. He'll make me sit in this parking lot. So I went in. It's all these guys behind the desk. And I said, yeah, I'd like to become a police officer. And they just looked at me, and they were so sweet, and they got a detective that worked out of the precinct, and hold on a minute, ma'am. So I go back there. I don't know what he was thinking. And so I sit down with him, and I'm giving him my information. He says, how old are you? And I said, I'm 18. He says, well, you have to be 21 to be a police officer. But we have a cadet program, and you have to be 18. I said, okay. So I filled in all this paperwork. I went back out to my dad with my grandfather, get in the car, and my dad says to me, so how'd it go? And I said, well, Dad, the real thing is, nobody looked like me in there. Because it was all guys. Everybody was guys. I just said, nobody looked like me. And that started the whole, I got my paperwork in. I ended up taking, there was back then there was a written test, but it wasn't for the police officer, just for the cadet. I had to be interviewed. Mm-hmm. You had the polygraph. And so that would have been 78 was when I graduated. And Christmas Eve, or the day before Christmas Eve, 78, December, I get a phone call from the police department saying, you're accepted as a cadet and you need to report January 10th, 1977, which was the following month. It's like, okay.
All right.
And that was 40 years ago.
So you spent your whole career with Baltimore County Police.
Oh yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And it was a real boys club.
Yeah, but what's funny about that part is that wasn't odd to me because I didn't have any sisters. I had 3 brothers. Yeah. So I did everything they did anyway, mm-hmm. and I was a tomboy. So I literally did not know until years and years later that when I came on as a cadet, there were probably maybe in the whole department 17 women, and that was counting myself as a cadet. And I think the numbers back in 77 was like 1,300 men, and out of that was like 15. And nobody acted like that it was strange seeing me, so I never thought anything of
That's
it.
That's good.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of funny stories when I first came out because there was hardly any women. Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing you started as a beat cop and then you made your way into homicide, or no?
Well, as a cadet. So you're not an officer. You don't carry a gun or anything. Okay. So as a cadet, there was only certain places you could go. Like my first assignment was a precinct, Essex precinct. I didn't even know where Essex was. I went to Pennsylvania for everything. So my dad had to write directions for me to get down to my first assignment. And I walk in, and another cadet that came on when I did, she was, another female cadet, but she was 20, so she wasn't a cadet long because she was gonna be turning 21 and going into the academy. So, but her and I there was 3 women in this whole in this whole precinct. And of course, wherever we were on opposite shifts. It's like, you know, one of the funniest stories is I would walk through the precinct and we worked the desk. So we would do fingerprints, we'd work on the computer, things that there's not even around anymore, the teletype machine, all that kind of stuff. And I would walk down a hallway where the sergeant's office was, and as I'm walking down, somebody would see me and I'd start hearing everybody in the office saying, church, church, church. Yeah, you didn't know what that was either. So I'm thinking, what is this? These guys all go to church? That's pretty cool because I go to church. It's like I didn't know all these cops go to church. And then one day I finally asked one of these old sergeants, he was a real sweetheart, so why do you guys always yell church when I'm walking down into your office? Well, Rose, we didn't want to cuss in front of you. So as soon as they saw me coming. So no, I didn't know they had cussed. It was so funny. It's like, well, that is really sweet. So pretty much as a cadet, I think they all treated me like they thought I was like their sister. I mean, it was awesome. And then, so I was there, and then I got pulled into narcotics as a cadet. So I worked undercover as a cadet. So,
wow.
Oh yeah, they stopped that probably couple year or two after us. They pulled 15 cadets into narcotics, and we were in the schools, and it was the second year they had done that with cadets. I was actually the second year, and it was another female cadet and I, and then the rest were all guys. And it would have been fine the first year because nobody in the schools, public schools, knew that there was any narcs in there. But then they made a big splash at the end of the year, because I remember this being in school, that they were making arrests. And then, so when they did it the following year, all the kids are looking for the narcs, because now you might have a narc in the school. Well, no one ever looked at me, had any idea that a female could be a narc, because there were no female police officers.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was great, because I was assigned to 2 or 3 schools. I had to go in and out. I was like, looking, and they would tell the principal, the only person that knew who we were was the principal and the vice principal of that school. That was it. The teachers didn't know. So I am walking down a hallway one day, and there's 2 teachers in front of me, and I'm right behind them walking. And I had a fake ID. I had a driver's license. They'd take us to MVA with a fake ID. And I'm listening to 2 teachers talking to each other, and they're saying, yeah, did you see that new kid that just came in this week? And they're saying, yeah, he's got a full beard. He's definitely the narc. I'm walking right behind him, and I am it in the school. So they had no idea.
Yeah.
And even when we and they had told us, the principal and vice principal, who they thought the kids were in there that were selling some serious, and they were selling LSD, everything. I was buying all this different stuff that I had to get. I had no idea what it was. The narcotics detectives I work with had to go through because I wasn't into drugs. I was in school into business classes and into sports. So they had to run through and tell me what these drugs were and show me. When it came to, we were done, the whole thing, and all the guys, all the cadets, and it was pretty much, you couldn't do anything more. The detectives made the arrest. So I'm there because I had ID'd the guys that I said, okay, she's the one, he's the one, whatever, that, yeah, you got the right guys. Our parents are bringing them in, and they're all coming out to me saying, oh, Rose, did they got you too? They locked you too?
Oh my God.
I had no idea. No. The funny thing about being a narc in the schools is the mom of the biggest dealer in the one school kept calling my lieutenant in narcotics saying, I want to report this girl. She's like I think she's into drugs, and I think she's getting the other kids into drugs. Really, ma'am, what's her name? And I had my fake name, my first name we kept, because I thought, can I keep my first name? Because I'm not going to know they're calling me, talking to me, but my last name was changed. And she said, that Rose Matthews, I think she's selling my daughter drugs.
Oh my gosh.
It was the exact opposite. It's like,
That's funny.
It was sad because I really liked this kid. I mean, I liked all of them. It's like, and they didn't get any jail time. Their parents, hopefully, well, she didn't have a good end, but, so that's why it doesn't, I was in narcotics at the time. I was 20, and they were putting a class in, and then I finally got into the academy class. So once you go through the academy class, then you're in patrol. Okay. Then you go into patrol. And my first assignment was Towson.
Okay. And then when did you get into homicide?
Oh my gosh, that wasn't until years later. So I went to Towson's patrol, Then I transferred from Towson to Wilkins Precinct, and that's when the department started the motorcycle unit, which was called the COPE unit, Citizen Oriented Police Enforcement.
Okay.
And I had been riding motorcycles since I was 16, so I put in for it. Again, not knowing that was really weird because there weren't any women police officers in 1981 or 82. But I mean, and that was great training. And then, you know, we're on the motorcycles. So, so from the, and I would get strange looks because the guys I rode with kept saying that I was causing accidents because when we'd pull up next to somebody and they were like one of these, and then, yeah, I guess they realized because I'm wearing the vest and the whole thing, but I guess once they finally could see my face and my hair, they like realized, oh my God. And then when we would pull over, you know, if we're doing community policing or crime prevention, we would pull over in businesses, parking lots. And we would sit there. Well, nobody back then would pull over and talk to any cops. Well, they did when we were parked, and they said the only reason they're pulling in here is to see if you're really a female police officer because they don't talk to us. So it was funny. We had a good.
Yeah, what a different time.
It was.
And were you the first sergeant in homicide, first female sergeant?
I was pretty much everywhere I went as a sergeant. I was probably the first female. There were other females in the department by then, but none of them had started to get promoted, or they didn't want to be supervisors, or they definitely didn't want to be in the units that I put in for. So yeah.
Okay, so then from there, how do you end up in sex crimes?
Well, so I took the promotional test, obviously, in the interviews, and I got promoted to sergeant, and I was in patrol as a sergeant for about a year or two, and then there was an opening in criminal investigation division, so a detective sergeant spot, and it was for the 3 to 11 shift. And so I put in for it and I got it. So that's how I got into the criminal investigation part of it. And that would have been 1990. So from there, I ended up taking over, became in charge of an economic crimes unit, which was fraud, pawn shop, economic crimes, computer crimes. So I had all these different units that I was in charge of. Again, the only female in that unit. And then we had 1995, we bought this farm. And I'm at my house, and it must have been nighttime because I was all day work when I was on that economic crimes unit. And a detective from homicide called my house, and, you know, cell phones then. And he said he was an officer that I had met as a cadet, and I would ride along with him in Essex. And it's really cool how all through my career, Ramsey is there. He's passed away, and he was such a good guy. But he would let me ride along with him when I was a cadet. And trust me, when you're an officer, you don't want cadets, you don't want anybody riding with you. But he would let me. I told him he got the short straw when they were all, because it was all guys. But he calls me, and he was from New Jersey. And he talks like this and called me Sergeant Woes. And so he said, Sergeant, the phone rings, and Sergeant Woes, is anybody else around you? Well, I'm in my house, okay? So I'm looking around and I'm saying, no, Rams, nobody else is here. Well, my sergeant, he's gonna leave, so you need to put in for homicide, be my homicide sergeant. I said, okay. So when I went back to work, I applied, because people were applying for it, and I put in for it, and then I was interviewed, and then I got the spot.
Got it.
So that was 1995. September of 1995, I became the first female homicide sergeant. Actually, pretty sure I'm the only one. I think they had a corporal come in eventually, but yeah.
And then 2004?
And then, so that was from, 1995. So for 9 years, I was the sergeant homicide. And then 2004, I was transferred over, and they actually called it sex crimes at the time when I first went into the unit of 2004. And it was actually one of my senior detectives in sex crimes that asked if I could apply to the colonel, because that's who you had to go through all the bosses. He felt, and he'd been in sex crimes for years, he felt that it was embarrassing for victims when they would have to go to the hospital because that's where they would go to get their rape exams by then, and when he identified themselves, the detectives, as I'm Detective so-and-so from sex crimes, he thought that would, because they're in the emergency room with everybody else. So he said, can we change to SVU, special victims? It's like, okay. So we put the paperwork in, and that's when we got it changed to SVU.
Interesting.
And then my last 14 years was in SVU before I retired.
How did those two units differ as far as resources and convictions. It sounds like they were vastly different.
Oh, yeah. Homicide gets everything. I mean, and I was not familiar with the sex crimes SVU unit, but in homicide, I mean, you have a murder and you got everybody had to drop everything to help us out. I mean, whether it was the crime lab, I mean, not that we didn't use them obviously in SVU, but the equipment that came out, I mean, when the cell phones eventually came out, homicide detectives eventually all got them. I go over to homicide. When I went over to sex crimes, it's like nobody had cell phones. It's like, are you kidding me? I mean, you know, it was just because it was a homicide.
Yeah.
But I go over to sex crimes and it was like they were like the redheaded stepchildren when I first went over there. So I had a really good lieutenant at the time, and who had come from homicide too as a sergeant, and he got promoted to lieutenant. We both went there, and it's like, this is crazy. It's like we need to get these guys a lot better training. You know, they weren't allowed to go to schools. They never sent them to schools that they needed to go to, and they needed to go to schools like some of the homicide schools, because some of the rapes were horrendous. I mean, they're all bad, but some of them were beaten or stabbed. I mean, so they needed to know those kind of crime scenes. So, and investigator school and all that. So that all changed, and we got that. And the resources that I needed when I had a stranger rape, it's like I end up getting, because I mean, my first couple months is when we had Thaddeus Clemens, the one serial rapist. Mm-hmm. And of all things, he was the first one that I'd ever dealt with. And what's weird about him, I'd only been in homicide for, I don't know, I mean, sex crimes for like a couple months. And it's right around Christmas, and I get a phone call from my corporal saying, we got a hit on a case. And it was from evidence that very few evidence did we have in our property room, but that was one of them. Said, yeah, on a guy, and your name's in the report as a corporal. And I said, really? What kind of case was it? And he said, well, apparently, Sarge, you were doing a decoy operation. It's like, please tell me and how you remember names, and you can ask another police officer that's been on forever, or there are cases that police officers work, detectives work. I said, please tell me that it's Thaddeus Clemens. Yeah. And he said, it's Thaddeus Clemens. I said, are you kidding me? This was in the 80s, and I was a corporal in this precinct when I was first promoted to corporal, and this guy was going around. It was horrific. He had done like 6 rapes by gunpoint. The victims, only one victim ever saw him. I said he would take him, you know, kidnap him in his vehicle, the whole 9 yards, and take him to his school and rape him, and then take him back and dump him back off. Well, the corporal that had been at that precinct for years, he had put a whole case file together. And he and I started talking. Of course, I was the only female corporal in the precinct, and I was unfortunately, I was the captain's aide, which could be good, could be bad. And he's telling me about this, and I said, God, Sid, you're afraid he's going to kill somebody, aren't you? If one of these women, because he always had a gun. And he said, yeah. And it's like, well, maybe I've seen TV. You've seen TV. Maybe we can do a decoy, because I was around the age. I was only in my 20s. So it was all TV stuff, because when I went to our captain, he said, we don't do that. We don't do decoys. And he was a sweetheart. We convinced him that we needed to do a decoy operation, and that because we knew he was always in the same area. He was always, these streets, and it was always when they were getting off the buses. And, right. You know, Sid had this whole big binder of dates and times, and the vehicles always changed, which was another reason why he hadn't gotten caught, and the victims never saw him. And I said, Sid, I said, well, I'll be surrounded by cops. They can be hiding in the trees and stuff. I said, they're not going to leave me out there. It's like, I'm not afraid to we need to do this. We need to do this. So we convinced him. I don't even know if he told his bosses how. I don't know. This might have been our secret. I'm not sure. When I see him someday, I'll have to ask him that. So we go out there, and I don't even know if I had a mic on, any kind of hidden mic or anything. I don't even think back then we did. But I had my gun, and that's all I needed. And so you couldn't see any of the cops, because this is, down in Catonsville, but they were everywhere. They weren't going to let me get hurt, and I certainly wasn't planning on getting hurt. I was going to shoot the guy if he came up with a gun, stuck a gun in my face. We didn't tell the captain that part. But my
And
guys
this was
knew
the
that.
guy they called the sunglass rapist,
Yes.
right? He was putting
Yes.
the welders.
Yes, and how he would come, and they were actually welding glasses, but the news picked up on it and said it's sunglasses, but it was welding glasses. And if you've ever seen them, when the welders put them on, they even cover the side. And at nighttime, that means he'd put them on, he'd come up behind these young girls, and they were all late teens, early 20s, all the same. And he would put these glasses on them at night so they couldn't see. He'd put them in a car, and each time it changed, and he'd fix the lock so they couldn't get out of the car. So this, and he always had a gun, and because they're all cowards. And so this is what, and so then I was walking on the one street that was one of the streets where he would pick, these women. It was like 3 different locations, but they were all close together. And I'm walking, and all of a sudden I see like all these red and blue lights going by, police cars going by like another street down, and they're like, zoo, 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 and it's like, what the heck's going on? Well, unfortunately, I wasn't what he wanted, but he grabbed somebody else 3 streets down from me. And this is what's sad about this, and you just don't know, and you didn't have DNA back then. So one of my guys came up to me and said, you're not gonna believe this. It's like he just tried to grab a girl, and it was the only one that he ever grabbed that got away. So they have her, he got away, but she gives a description of a vehicle. But back then, you can't lock somebody up. They pulled over a description of a vehicle, but she couldn't ID the guy because she couldn't see him. So the guy, they had to let the guy go. Well, fast forward all these years later, and it turns out it was him. Nice. And how his DNA, which is so sickening, and that's how you learn so much about these monsters. After that, where he almost got caught, because he literally did get caught, but he got away with it. After that, he had, I think, one more rape of an adult. And then what put his DNA into the system all those years later is right after that rape, he raped his, wife's 5-year-old granddaughter in the city. And he was convicted, and he got, I don't know how many years, but that DNA, because by then, rapists, if you're convicted of a sexual assault, put you into the system. So fast forward, when we started, we found these different clothing items that had DNA on them in 2004. And I was actually in homicide when the detective from sex crimes went down to that property room and started finding anything that looked like it could be evidence, because DNA really didn't come into play until the late 90s. I went into homicide in 95. I knew about it before I went into sex crimes because we started using it in the late 90s. So I thought, and so they went down, and it was one of my detectives when I first went to sex crimes was the one that did that. And when our lab got DNA off of it, it hit on him. So, and he was out. Yeah. He was out. He'd served a couple years for raping the 5-year-old. I think he served like 9 or 10 years. But by the time we got him in 2004, he was out. So he went back in.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there was, I would say, a turning point in your career when you learned about Dr. Brightnecker's slides. So
yes. So you want to hear that story? Because that's like out of a movie too.
Exactly. Yes. Tell me that story.
Yeah. So I went into, like I said, I was transferred from homicide to sex crimes in September of 2004. And I have a really good friend that worked out of the pathology lab, and has for years, pathology lab in GBMC Hospital, Greater Baltimore Medical Center. And she's actually my aunt. We call her my aunt, but it's actually her niece. So I've known her for years. I mean, I would see her at, maybe once a year. And her and I love basket bingos. And if you don't know what that is, I had to explain this to somebody. That's where you go to a bingo, and what you can win are baskets and the Longaberger baskets.
Oh, I know the Longaberger baskets.
Okay,
yep.
So her and I were really big. Well, I go into sex crimes September, and I think it was that first month, there was a really cool basket bingo that the police department was putting on the fraternal order police for a fundraiser. Mm-hmm. So I call her and I said, hey, do you want to go to this basket bingo? Sure. She said, I'll drive. So she met me at headquarters, and we're driving down the road. And it's a good thing she was driving. She had a van, and another friend of ours, another one of my best friends, likes basket bingo. So she was with us. And she's driving down the road, and she said, so, Rose, you're still in homicide, right? I said, no, I'm over in sex crimes now. She said, really? She said, well, when are you going to come and get Dr. B's slides? And I said, Doctor who? And what are you talking about, slides? And she said, well, he's retired now, but I'm the keeper of these slides. And she said that, whenever Dr. Brightnecker did a rape exam, he would keep slides for himself. He'd give the police department their evidence, and then he would make slides. And I looked at her, and I'd already known the value of DNA because in homicide, we actually cleared the murder of a police officer that was one of my cases that my guys handled. And we got DNA off of a necklace. So I knew all about DNA from being in homicide. And she's telling me this, and I said, slides, it's like, could be DNA. And I said, how far back does it go? Well, if you don't think this is all weird and meant to be, 1977. I mean, that's when I came on. And it literally went back to 1975, but the hospital told her to start getting rid of this. He never wanted anything gotten rid of. He asked her to hang on to it. But this had been years and years later, and luckily she had only gotten up to 1977. I said, please hold on to everything you have, every slide you have. I said, because this could be a gold mine. Didn't know if we were going to have it. I mean, look how old these slides were. And they went from 1977 to the late 90s, and then the whole DNA process changed. But that's what these slides were. And we had none of his evidence that was taken for our cases because, like most police departments around the country, you don't have a lot of storage. And if you can imagine all the evidence from all the different cases, all the different crimes, one of the first things that they would start going through is rape cases and burglary cases, and if you didn't have somebody locked up for it, then it just got destroyed. And because they didn't have a Dr. B that realized someday DNA would come, to fruition. And obviously they stopped when DNA came up, in 2000 or whatever.
Stop destroying things.
Yeah.
How many slides were there?
Well, there was well over 1,300.
He was really ahead of his time.
Oh, way ahead.
To save
and his background was he was born and raised in Austria. His father was the head guy in forensics in Austria, and he came over to the United States. And one of his first cool jobs, I guess, was the ME's office. He was one of the MEs that he would actually go to crime scenes. So he started with the ME's office, and it's out of Baltimore City, but it's for Maryland. And then he got hired by GBMC to start the whole rape clinic thing. So, but even then, he always felt, how did he know that there was some kind of evidence that he was going to get from victims of sexual assault that would one day point to a suspect? Back then, the only thing you could get DNA-wise was blood. And all you would get from blood, like a suspect or victim's blood on a suspect or the other way around, it was just a blood type. That didn't give you a suspect. So basically, if you were a victim of a rape, especially when we'll talk about stranger rapes, if you couldn't pick out the guy, if they grabbed somebody around the corner and they had nothing on him and the victim couldn't even pick him out, they walked. Could be good or could be bad. The good part of that is we didn't have anybody locked up on all my cases, the cold cases that we worked on, that somebody else had been locked up for. So that was a good thing. The bad thing is if you didn't have a one-on-one where they could pick him out, that person was still out there, like Alphonso Hill.
Right.
So
were more people just getting away with rape prior to DNA becoming a big thing?
Oh, they had to. Oh, stranger rapes, yeah. I mean, if it's a rape where you knew who the person was, then the detectives would develop a case.
Yeah.
But if it was a stranger rape, how are you going to lock somebody up with no evidence? And she can't pick you out because you didn't have DNA. People watch all these CSIs now and they think there's always DNA. Well, there wasn't until the late 90s and then on
when
up.
When did CODIS become a thing?
That was in the late 90s.
Late 90s.
In the 90s, yeah.
So his slides, is it like what I'm picturing, a piece of glass and it has
dry
sperm? Like what?
Well, you were hoping, because what we would do, the whole process, we had to figure out, because there's nobody in the country that could tell me how to do these cold cases. So it's so then we figured it out between the biologists and GBMC. The first most important thing is, how do we collect this? Because this wasn't our evidence. This evidence belonged to GBMC. So then I had to sit down with our state's attorneys, and we have great state's attorneys, and one of them's even still there, and Scott Schellenberger, he's in charge. So we had to sit down with them and the lawyers for GBMC because of HIPAA. How do we collect these slides where there's no question when you go to trial, when you get hit, because you don't want the defense attorney, if they have nothing else, what are they going to attack? The slides and the evidence. That's what they're going to go after. So between GBMC's lawyer said, well, give us a subpoena. Like, state attorney said, okay, that'll work. So we would go, I would send my corporal, one of my detectives, or I would go in front of a grand jury. And that was a hoot, because the grand jury is used to seeing current cases. So I would walk in, or my corporal or my detective, and we're talking to them about something happened, and the prosecutor reads to them, the case, and then they realize, you can see when the light bulb goes off, like, when was, and they'll ask me, when did this happen? And I would say 1978 or 1980, and it's like, and they can be real, because these are all civilians, and they can be really like ask questions and a zillion questions, and some of them can get a little riled about, cases that go in front of them that they want, that the prosecutor wants to indict. All we ever got was, that's just wonderful that you're doing this. No problem. And I mean, I'd be in there for after 10 minutes, and they'd come out, okay, here you go, here's your subpoena. So I'd give that to the corporal or one of my detectives, and they'd go over and serve the subpoena on GBMC, and that's how we'd get it. We'd bring the evidence back to our building, to the property room, and then our biologists would have to go down and get it. And we couldn't do it in our own lab. No one could do it in our lab, because all the labs, police labs, have to be accredited. Well, nobody was accredited for slides because nobody had slides. So then the process became, well, we're going to have to send them out. Our biologists would prep them, but we still had to send them out, and it cost money. Okay. So then we had to fight that battle. We did.
So describe to me where he was getting the DNA that's on these slides. These were vaginal swabs?
Yes, they're vaginal swabs. And we didn't know, after all these years, I mean, these are still exactly what you're talking about, these glass slides. Yeah. And some cases had multiple slides from the same victim. So our biologists, who are obviously scientists, they would go through the slides and find sperm on the slides. And not all slides had sperm. But that's what they were looking for. And once they found that, then that's what was packaged to go out to a lab, which at the time was Brady. So, and even then, are you going to get a hit? Because, and it was so funny, because Dr. B on his paperwork would always say, there's sperm on this one, there's sperm on that one. And he was right. I mean, he was always right. Or there's not, there's fluids on this one, but there's not sperm. Nowadays, even fluid can be done. So it's even amazing what it's come from, even from 2005 on. But we still didn't know if we were going to get hits on this, because how old is this? And we would. We started getting hits on different cases.
So essentially, you had to find a cold case where the victim had been treated at GBMC, and then hope that the suspect had done this another time where his DNA made it into CODIS.
Yeah. So, I mean, and when I had my corporal go through what we have, they still have them, I'm sure, the logbooks. So when I found out about this, I told him to start with 1977 and start going through all our logbooks for open stranger cases. Okay. Because they're the cases nobody's identified. If it's open and it's a stranger, we don't know who he is. Yeah. So that's what he started doing. So then he would pull the files for me. I would look through the files. And it's not just to see which hospital. Obviously, that was the first thing we're looking for, because that was a good one. But we had 2 hospitals back in those days. All the way up till when I first came on, we had 2 hospitals that they could go to. It was Franklin Square or GBMC. Okay. So the first thing we had to see, and we put those cases aside, if they were Franklin Square, they were put aside because they didn't have a Dr. B there. So we knew we weren't going to find their evidence, there, and it wasn't in headquarters. So then I would read the case where they went to GBMC. So when they opened up the file, I'd read the case. They went to GBMC, so that's a possibility. I mean, could be that he didn't have a slide. You just hope that they did. And then we looked for, was there fingerprints? Because Laura Newman we didn't know this until years later, but we'd always see, did they get fingerprints from a scene? Was there photographs of the scene? Anything physical, we wanted it all. And that's what the detectives would review the case. I would review it and say, okay, this is what you need to look for. And then we need to find out, is our victim still alive? So, because to do DNA, at this point, you have to have a victim swab because you didn't back then, because there was no such thing as DNA. What you had was the vaginal smears from the actual rape, but you needed the victim to be able to send it out to a lab. You had to have the victim so they can compare it against the DNA they're going to get from these slides. So my detectives had to go into their research and find out, is the victim alive and where are they? And then that was a whole nother process we had to develop. And because I wanted my detectives to be able to knock on the door and see them in person. This wasn't going to be a phone call.
Yeah.
And some of the victims were out of state, so we did that a different way, and I'll tell you about that. But they would knock on the doors, and none of us had ever been victims of sexual assault. They had handled, because my squad, I didn't have a cold case squad. My squad, my SVU squad, handled current cases, and that's I would give them, when they weren't working a current case, I would hand them a cold case, because we didn't have a cold case. So they were doing both. They loved the cold cases.
Obviously doing current work at the same time as this.
So they knew how a victim would respond on a current case, because that's what they were running on all the time. And what shocked them in the first couple, before we got our hits, because we needed to get the DNA before it could even be sent out, they had to get the victim's DNA and make sure when they're reading through the case file that the case file is what the victim said happened. Mm-hmm. Trust me, on the victim of a stranger case, it's identical. A victim that said she was a rape of a stranger case and doesn't remember anything about it, or doesn't remember, completely changes the scenario. We had 2 of those out of the whole group that it didn't even happen. The way she said. So those 2 were the only 2 that were the problems. Everybody else, 30 years later, 20 years later, these women don't forget anything. But that's not what the shocker was. They're knocking on the door and they're saying, we're Detective so-and-so. We just wanted you to know that we've never closed your case. It's been an open case. We've never forgotten about you. But we now may have possible evidence. We couldn't tell them we did, because we didn't know if we were going to get a hit. But when they knocked on these doors, when they tracked these women down, a lot of times these women had never told their husbands, their children that they didn't have at the time, but they now do. Their families didn't even know about this. Mm. Once in a while, the husbands knew, whoever they were married to at the time. But a lot of times, the kids never knew that their mother was a victim of a rape. Mm. And then they basically responded like, my detectives felt so bad, because they felt like they were just throwing them right back into reminding them of everything, how horrible it was. Yeah. So when they came back to me and telling me this, we had something called a SART team. That was the sergeant of the sex crimes unit, SVU unit, was part of, and it was GBMC had hosted the SART team, and sexual assault response team. And that was already in place in 2004. And who we had on that team were, like I said, my lieutenant, myself, then we had the forensic nurses, we had the different colleges. They would send their, someone from their law enforcement part, they would be there. We had counselors on there, a psychiatrist. And I went back to the very next meeting. It was a monthly meeting. And I told them what's going on. I told them about, we're going to cold cases. We don't know if we're going to actually have hits. But this is what my detectives are running into. It's like the women are hysterical. It was so awful for them, because they didn't think at all that they'd be happy. And then they were, that we never forgot about them. And then we had state's attorneys on this SART team too. Well, they needed to be prepared, because they had to get these women, when we started getting these hits and making arrests, these same women they had to walk them through to testify. So it was a really great team that we had, and we developed a brochure that I called the cold case brochure. And basically we had women victims that could have been anywhere in the country, and some of them were. So when we developed the brochure, I told them, my detectives are going to give it out to when they go to do an interview for a cold case, a victim. But I need a phone number that can be anywhere in the country. It has to be one phone number that they will get them, because someone calling the rape crisis line are going to get 20 some years old that have no idea what they're are talking about something just happened, and really couldn't help these women, and these women needed something. So from then on, once the brochure was developed and GBMC printed it out, I actually have one, before they left, they handed the victim this, and then they got the swabs from them, and obviously got that back to the biology lab. But just to tell you how big of a shock this was, after one of our first couple, even as we were doing this all through my 14 years when we started getting DNA hits, I mean, one time totally explains what I'm talking about. My two detectives had gone and knocked on the door of a victim that we were looking at, a cold case stranger, and need to get her swabs. And I know how good they are. I know they explained everything to her, had her go through, what happened back then. And then and they told me they had found her and they were talking to her, and I think her husband was there with her. And about an hour later, my office phone rings and I answer it. And it was this timid voice, and she said, "Yeah, excuse me, Sergeant, I think 2 of your detectives were just here, but I'm not really sure what they were here for." I mean, her brain, I guess, just froze in that moment. So I went through the entire thing again for her. So, because literally, and I know they explained the entire thing, they got her swabs, but that was the phone call. So it was a total shock.
I'm sure it was a total shock for these men too.
And I had women. I had half and half. I had 3 women and 3 men. I had 6 detectives. So,
but
I
the
mean,
men
all of them
who were the rapists.
Oh, you mean, well,
who must have thought they got away.
Oh, they all did. They all did. And that played in when we did interviews.
Let's say you had this strategy.
Oh, so you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, talk to me about that.
Okay. So because I was in homicide, when I was in homicide, my detectives, they were awesome too. And they would get bored. If they didn't have a homicide they were working on, they decided to pick up cold case homicides, which is how I knew it was just preparing me for this, that I didn't even know I was ever going to go there. So and I talked over with my detectives when we started getting the hits, and we were going to start bringing them in. And I said, and talking to the state attorney, what are you going to need? Because we know, my guys all knew how to interview a current rapist. But what we needed is, where were they 20 and 30 years ago? Did they know this woman from 20 and 30 years ago? And when we had a unit that would, go out and do the lockup, plain clothes, and they would bring them in, and we made sure we told these detectives, don't tell them what you're locking them up for. So when they came in, these are all, trust me, they all had prior records of everything, probably but rape, but they'd all been through the system. And so they're coming in thinking, and they go into an interview room, we have a taped interview room, and I'm listening to it in my office, and they're thinking they're coming in for a current rape, or crime. They don't even think it's rape, but a crime. So my detectives have to go in, and what they do is they say preliminarily, it's like, so where were you in 1986? Where did you live? Because we had case files, but some of the case files had been started to be destroyed. So trust me, we had stuff on microfilm, but some of these cases we were even missing detectives' files. So basically, the bad guy is going to have to tell us what we need to know and not realize it. So they would go through and they'd say, like, well, where were you and such, where did you live? Okay, and what were you driving back then? Okay, and then one of the other things my detectives always got from our victims, and we call them survivors, but I like to call them victims because I wanted to go into trial them as a victim, because I wanted the judge to hit the bad guys with as hard as he can. It's great that, and they're all survivors, but I wanted them to look as nasty and as bad as they are, because they're monsters. So when they would go, one of the other things I had my detectives do is see if you can get a picture of your victim when she was sexually assaulted all those years ago. We need the picture from back then, not current. We need the picture from that. So they would always get pictures. So one of the things my detectives would do when they went in there, and like I said, they're finding out where they were back then, what they were driving. Some of our cases had descriptions of vehicles, and that was it. And then they would always show them this picture of this woman. Do you know this woman? Nope, never seen her before in my life. And this is all taped, because this is what we need for trial. So they're looking and it's like, do you know such and such? And they give them the name of this woman. No, I don't know anybody like that. Show them the picture. Do you know this woman? Nope, never seen her before in my life. Because by the time they got to trial, the defense attorneys were trying to say these women were prostitutes. They picked them up. They were ex-girlfriends. And it's like, and then the prosecutor would stick that video up and say,
they didn't know each other.
I have no idea who this is. Okay, so everything was so different, from, like I said, a regular, and we wanted them to say no.
Right. Right.
On a current case, we wanted them to say, yeah, I knew her, and it was consensual, whatever they would come up with. But we wanted them to say, I've never seen her before in my life. And they all would do it. They would all do it because they had no idea. Yeah. And they were all in shock because at the end of it, we'd get their swabs because you always do a doubles. You always get another swab when you lock someone up anyway. And they'd tell them, and then they'd leave the paperwork with them and let them read it. And you could see their faces and they're flipping through this. And Alphonso Hill was one of they're all great.
Yeah, let's talk about him because that case in particular was sort of personal, not sort of, it was personal for you because you had a friend who was one of his victims.
Yeah, when I was cadet, I had a friend of mine that was another cadet, and it was actually her best friend. She was a roommate of hers. And I met her through, her and became a friend. And it's funny, when you're in the police department, you might see someone when you first come on and you work in different, and you might never see him again for the rest of your career. I mean, because it's a big department and there's a bunch of different agencies. So after I went into the academy, I lost track of all them. But I had heard, because I came on, like I said, in 77, that in 78, that she had been sexually assaulted. So never heard anything more about it. I just assumed, being a cadet, and back then I just assumed the bad guy had been arrested. So I didn't know until years later when I became a sergeant that case was never cleared. And I hadn't seen her for years. And then when I found out, by the time so I already knew before I went into sex crimes that case had never been cleared. So then I go into sex crimes and I'm having this, ride with this friend of mine. And when she said 1977, I'm thinking, I need to have my corporal pull her case up because it went out, I wasn't thinking about it again. And I said, look for, 1977, start, and then pull all the cases. Well, originally in the logbook, and a sergeant usually keeps that, he had looked at that case and he bypassed it because it said it was cleared. And I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know it was cleared. I said, pull that case. So we're reading it, and it was one of these where they thought they had a suspect, but nobody could be ID'd, so they never took it back out as being open. So I said, well, this is an open case then. So then we sent that through the system. And one of the first time it came back, it said they didn't have enough. And they couldn't say that it was one of and remember, we don't know who he is yet, but it didn't match the other ones because he said they didn't have enough to put in CODIS. So then my biologist, and like I said, remember, I said sometimes we had multiple slides for one victim. So the biologist was not happy with that company's response. She goes back over the slides again, and she said, you need to go over, and she had one other slide that wasn't as good as the one she sent to them, but she said, no. She sent it back and told them, there has to be something on, there's got to be DNA on this. And next thing we know, they got a hit.
And now, these were Dr. B slides?
So at the time, because we didn't send all 4 slides, it could be anywhere from 2 to 4 slides. Okay. One of them, they might have had more than that. The biologists don't send all those slides. They send the best one. You start out with the best one. Well, and it didn't come back. So then they found they had another one of her slides in her kit, and they sent that out. But we still didn't know who it was, but at least we know that we're going to find out who this guy is because it matched one of our other victims. So we know there's a serial rapist because within the that first year, and that would have been, I guess, 2005, 2006, I kept getting another hit with another victim and another year. And it's like I was up
recent hits, like he was
none of them
striking,
were recent.
Or you were looking back at old
cases?
No,
these were all the slide cases. Okay. And I started out, I would get a hit for a 1978 case. Then I'd get a hit all on the same guy, different victims, but it always came back to the same suspect, but the suspect was unknown.
So the same DNA.
Same DNA. So it was the same suspect, but different victims. And I had a 78 case. I had a 77 case. Then I would get a hit on an 86 case. And then I got a hit on a 2000 city case. And again, we didn't know who it was, but the victims were all different. But the suspect, it was the same suspect. And it's
where were these rapes happening?
On what I called a Loch Raven corridor. He had his hunting ground, and all these rapes were coming back at the same area in Towson. And so when they started coming back as the same area, then I brought up this detective who was on light duty, and because she was pregnant, and she was also a forensic artist. And I brought her up because remember, my guys were working current cases, so then I told my major, I need help. I said, we've got a serial rapist that apparently is still out there. I said, he's been raping the last 20 and 30 years. The last case was 2000. I said, I need help, and my detectives don't have the time that we needed. So I got Evelyn, who she was happy as can be because she was stuck behind a phone because she was pregnant. And I told her when I got her, I said, look at these cases, look at these addresses. And then I said, can you do me a favor and start going through all the files and pull every case that you have sexual assault that is a stranger case in that corridor, every case. So that's when you came up with all these other cases, because she was following the MO, and because the description of what they could tell was the same, but the MO, the area, and that's where we came up with all these other cases. And that's when we had to go through the files to see if they were did they go to GBMC or did they go to Franklin?
And another strange coincidence here on how you were able to identify this guy.
Okay. Yeah, this is weird too. But, like I said, like Evelyn, Eve Grant, who is the forensic one, she recently said, if I hadn't lived this, I would have never believed this. So one out of all these cases did we have a composite. And this is a composite that was done back in the 70s or 80s. And it was literally, you have to watch it, you have to bring that up to how you do composites. Because this wasn't an artist drawing back then. It was actually flipping noses and eyes and stuff like that.
Okay.
So you got to really go back to the old TV shows. But that's what we had back then. And that's how they did it. And she came to me and she said, Sarge, I have one that was from the 70s or 80s. And she said, out of all these cases, I've got one composite. I said, really? She said, yeah. And I had used her, I had pulled her up when I was in homicide to do, if we had a witness of a homicide, to do a forensic drawing. And she was right on. I mean, from what these people would describe, she was always so good. And she said, but I haven't been able to do aging. I've never had a case, and I would really like to age this to now. So it would have been from 78, 79 to 2004, 2005. I said, go for it. So the way forensic artists work, if you've ever seen one, they literally start with, and she was using a picture, normally it would be somebody she's interviewing, and she'd do the eyes, and each would be a separate page, separate paper she was drawing. So she would do it at home. She wouldn't even do it while she was working because she was busy doing the other cases. And literally she would have, her dining room table would be spread with all these drawings that she's doing as she's trying to age this photograph or this composite. Well, her husband is a city cop. I knew both of them because I rode motorcycles with them. My husband and I did. And I had already met Evelyn when I pulled her up on a homicide case, one of my detectives. So I know her husband. Her husband was a city cop, but he worked out of city police, worked out of this one unit called RAT, out of the same floor that I was on. And city cops, all police departments, all police officers once a year have to go for a refresher training, and it could be 3 days to a week. And Chris had to go to for his Baltimore City, Baltimore City. And an instructor, and I'm not making this up, an instructor didn't come in that for one of the classes, so they put a VHS tape, because this was 2005, I guess, of a 48 hours interview, which is a show. Is it still on? It's probably still on.
So, yeah.
Okay, 48-hour show. Yeah. So he puts that on, the instructor, to kill the time, and it was a 48 hours interview of a rapist that Baltimore City Cold Case Squad handled, that they got a fingerprint hit on from the 80s, and his victim, Laura Newman, who had pushed Baltimore City for years to try to clear this case, and then they realized they have a fingerprint. And for whatever reason we can go into later, he decides that he doesn't mind being interviewed. Now this guy that they're interviewing is been convicted of Laura Newman's case for second degree. He's in there for a couple years, and they interview him in Hagerstown. That's the penitentiary I believe he was in at the time. And they interview him, and then a separate interview, they interview Laura. Well, this is the VHS tape, and that Monday, Evelyn and Chris come walking into my office, and they're standing in my door like two kids in, a candy shop. And they've got this VHS tape, and they're saying, Sarge, we think we know who this guy is. And by then, we're up to 6 rapes that we have no idea, going from 1978 to 2000. And I'm looking at him, I was like, what? Well, and he's going through this whole spiel, and he says, this is the guy, because I've been seeing Eve's got all these drawings, and I said, this is definitely the guy. And it's like, I look at him, and I said, so you're saying he's in Hagerstown Penitentiary? He said, yeah. Well, how long has he been in there? Well, he's been in there for a couple years. I said, well, he can't be our guy. We should have got a DNA hit. They should have taken his swabs. But they were so sure. And they were just like, and I said, okay, just give me it. I'll look at it. So my detectives had to find a VHS. Even then, you had to find a player. So my detectives and I, we're all in the detective's office, the room where all those guys are, and they get a TV and they get and they put that on. And I've heard people say how the hair on the back of their neck just stands up when something happens. And I'm looking at his interview, and literally the hair went up the back of my neck, and I'm thinking, how can this possibly be? We should have got a hit on him. And I'm looking at him, and my detectives are all looking, and we're looking at this drawing, the composite from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's like, I agree with you guys. It definitely looks like him. So I get back to my office. I get on the phone to Michelle, who's in charge of the CODIS whole system for Maryland, and it's through the state police, but that's who everybody submits. And I was on a first name basis with her by then, because after the third and then the fourth hit and then the fifth, I kept calling her, and it's like, Michelle, are you sure you don't have a hit on him? No, Rose, I don't have a hit on him. So I called her. I went right back to my office, and I said, Michelle, I'm going to give you a name. I said, I know I'm being a pain, but I don't know how this is possible, but I think this is our guy. So normally she'd get back with me in like 2 weeks, and sometimes it might be an email, sometimes a call. And 2 hours later, she calls me, and she said, well, he's here. They've taken his swabs, but they haven't been put into the system. And at the time, the state police were really short of funds, and they were way behind in getting prisoners into the CODIS database that were supposed to be in there, rapists, murderers, whatever the guidelines were. And they had taken his swabs multiple times in the couple years he'd been there, but they had never gotten the money to get to him yet. And I said, okay, well, when will you be getting him in? And she said, well, we might actually be getting him in like a month or so. But she said, you'd be quicker if you got a search warrant and had your lab do it. I said, no problem. So I got two of my female detectives, because I'd given them the case. And I said, get a search warrant that day. You got to get a search warrant. And the next morning we were driving up to Hagerstown. And we got a search warrant to get his, and that's what we wanted, the swabs, and to try to interview him. I mean, we didn't have him as for sure. Yeah. So they interviewed him, and he blew him off, but we got his swabs. Came back to headquarters, gave him to our biologists, and they all knew this case and this guy, because every time we had another case, I explained to him, it's like, you kidding me? And they knew we've got a guy that's raped all these women through the years. So these women were just on top of it. And normally, like CSI, and that they get a hit within an hour. No. That doesn't normally work. It's like months usually. And homicide usually gets, we go first anyway. Well, not when I went into SVU. It's like that changed if we had a stranger rapist. So like a week later, I'm in my office, and the robbery detectives are all on one side of me, all their desks open in the open area, and I hear all this commotion. And I'm sitting at my desk, and all of a sudden, all my detectives, all the biologists are upstairs. Eve, her husband, Kristen, are all like standing in this hallway in front of my office door. And I'm looking at them, and I said, please tell me that it's him. It's him, Sarge. It's him. It was like a big party. It's him. Next day, they got the warrants, and we brought him. He was already incarcerated, but still, we got the warrants. The girls got the warrants, brought him down to headquarters and interviewed him. He didn't say anything. Yeah. Well, the only thing he said is he couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He couldn't believe it.
I'm sure.
And he thought that he was telling, when he finally read the warrant for him for all these rapes, he looks up at my detectives and he said, you planted this. You planted my DNA on these women. Really? You think we did? Keep that going. So it's like, yeah. And of course he said that he didn't know any of these women, which was great too.
Right. And how many total was it? How many
By
rapes?
the time we were done, by the time we went to trial, I think we had 10 cases. 8 of them he pled guilty to. 2
Wow.
we held back, and then a year later we got another one that wasn't anywhere in that area.
How did it feel to solve that one, especially with that personal connection you had?
Oh, when we got the hit, it was awesome. I mean, I'm telling you, DNA was the gold mine. When she told me that, it's like, just please. And I didn't know anything about Dr. Brightnecker. I didn't know, you know. I mean, nobody else knew to do this all these years. So, I mean, but he did. And I knew DNA was a big thing now. And I was just praying. We were all praying that we were going to get hits.
A lot of this like really came together in such incredible ways.
Yeah,
was it fate?
That's what I think. I mean, I would never, when I came on the job, I would have never thought that I would end in SVU, because to me, I liked homicide, you know, I liked being in, you know, patrol. That was never my career goal, to ever be in that unit and to go in that unit. And then while I was in homicide, Thaddeus Clemmons's the clothing stuff from those rapes were being submitted, not knowing. I was in, you know, when I was in homicide, all that was starting to be submitted through biology and all that. And then, you know, that same year I end up in SVU, sex crimes, and we get the hit when I'm there as a sergeant. What is the odds of that? What is the odds of any of this? I just think, I don't know if you believe in destiny. It was meant to be. I don't know. I can't explain it.
How many total cold cases were you able to solve with the help of Dr. B slides?
Well, it's a combination, because my lieutenant in 2015 put my whole unit in for, and even I put my detectives in that had retired, that had been working the cold cases, and he went through from 2004 until 2015, and he came up with like 84 cases. Most of them were Dr. B. Some of them was from, like Thaddeus Clemmons was from, you know, evidence that we had in, but a lot of those cases were from him.
Wow.
And it's just great that all of them were cold cases, every single one. And they were all stranger cold cases. And in that group you had somebody like Alphonso Hill, multiple serials. So in that group that he had, you know, by the time we were done with him, 10 or 12. Yeah. You know, I had, you know, Thaddeus Clemmons in that group. And he had, I think we ended up with 6 or 8 with him. I mean, you had some that did 1 for whatever reason, and why they didn't, well, and I say for whatever reason, I don't buy it that as a stranger rapist only did 1. The problem is, where did the other ones occur, and what happened to the DNA? Could have been destroyed. So to me, we had a lot that were multiple, but then we had some that was 1. But to me, they're, and I think we had 2 out of the whole group that we weren't able to clear. And to me, if we weren't able to clear it, that means they were dead, or they never got locked up with something where we could get their DNA. That's the only 2 possibilities. And one was a rape, and then I think a year later, whoever it was killed someone, murdered a woman in Baltimore City, and we were never able to clear that. And we went down to Baltimore City and got their whole homicide file, and brought that back to my detectives, and they interviewed, and this was talking again about 20 and 30 years ago. So now they have to go down to the block in the city and try to find dancers, and, you know, it wasn't the best people to look for, but they located a lot of them. Some of them were dead, but we're never ever to clear that. Well, to me, the guy was from the city. That means he was probably killed in a drug deal, and we never, because all of a sudden, you know, we had this one, and then we never had anything else, and we never got a hit. And it's still in the system, and it'll always be in the system, but to me, that's someone that was probably killed in a drug deal, so we would never have gotten the DNA. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Did you get to personally know Dr. B?
Oh, yeah. So I went to, a good friend of mine, pretty much my best friend, who ran the forensic unit, the forensic nurses, and started the schools and stuff. When I went there in 2004, when I went to SVU, that's pretty much when she started being the forensic, and then she took over the unit and went through training, got a bunch more nurses. Linda Kelly, she won't mind me telling her name. And she had been at GBMC for years before she took over this, so she knew Dr. B. So, and they were friends, and she had met his wife and stuff. So she introduced me to him when she's part of the SAR team. She ran the SAR team. So when we realized they were all Dr. B, she was on the phone right away to him, telling him, you know, that you're not going to believe this, but they're finally, the department, they're going to start putting these cases through. And then by the time we went to trial, and I think it was 2007 with Alphonso Hill, I thought, we'd already had other cases that we'd already gone to trial from his slides. And, I was telling Linda, it's like, maybe can you call him and maybe bring him to Alphonso Hill's, because he was going to plead. It wasn't going to be a long thing. I mean, Dr. B was already in his 80s, and he had actually testified in some of the earlier cases. And that was a hoot. But anyway, so I said, can you bring him? Because I would like him to see what he's accomplished. I mean, see all these women and, listen to their victim impact stories. And we knew they were going to be unbelievable. And see this guy, this monster, plead guilty. And she had filled him in on how many cases we had had by the time he went to trial. So she brought him. So he's sitting there, and he's a big man, but he was very humble, very humble. And she's sitting with, she's brought him there, and she's sitting there. So the whole trial's over. He pled guilty. The women got to go up, the ones that could actually tell the judge the victim impact. The ones there were some that wrote it down, and the prosecutor, Jason, he read, their victim impact. And it was like, you couldn't hear a pin drop in there. And finally the judge up, and he, Dane Levitz, he's passed away now, but he was a really good judge. And he said, he was speechless, and the man, if you knew Dana Levitz, was never speechless. And after these women were talking, he was like speechless. And then he finally looked at Alphonso and he said, you're a monster. It's like, you shall never get out of prison, ever. And he was going on. And then all of a sudden he said, it's a real shame that Dr. Brightnecker couldn't be here to see, and none of these women knew that he was there, that Dr. Brightnecker couldn't see this conviction that this man is going away because of what he did. And so I was waiting for somebody to say something, and all of a sudden I think Jason, the prosecutor, said, well, Your Honor, actually Dr. Brightnecker is here. And he's like, really? So all these women's, the heads are like swiveling, because he wouldn't stand up. And you could see Linda saying, Dr. B, stand up. So she finally got him to stand up. Well, this man stood up, and everybody, except for Alphonso Hill, he probably clapped too, just including the judge, who never has any emotion. They all clapped. The deputy sheriffs, they were all like this, and really the women got to see him, and it was good for him. It was good for him to see that. Yeah. And then years later, he got an award, I think it was called Titans of Medicine from GBMC, and I made sure I went to that. Good. And it was, I think, 3 doctors that got that. It's a very prestigious award. And so I made sure I was there, and I was working still, obviously, and I was invited. So I'm sitting there with all these, citizens, and, big dollar people, because obviously they were very good with the, donating money. And I'm sitting behind this one woman, and I wish I had her jewelry. She had a lot of nice jewelry. And all of a sudden, Dr. B goes up there, and I never knew how he felt about me, because I never, talked about me with these cases. And I'll never forget this. He's standing up there and he said, I just want to say, and with this, this heavy accent, I just want to say that I am so proud to know Sergeant Brady, because without her, these cases would, he's going on and on and on. Now I'm getting embarrassed, but he's saying we would have never had these, and it was a wonderful thing that, what she did. Well, this woman with all the gold and diamonds and stuff, she turns around and we high five. High five, and she said, way to go. I said, yeah, it was pretty exciting.
You both needed to find each other in order for this justice to be served, and you did. What's happening with his slides today? Are they still at GBMC?
No, they ended up, after I retired, they figured out a way, because we had to do one case at a time. And then, really, I think the last year, one of my detectives came up with, why can't we just do a subpoena for all the rest of them? So in 2017 is when I retired after 40 years. So they came up with the way between the state's attorney's office, and GBMC, to get a list, because remember, we might not have had the names, hopefully. Right. Because GBMC, Baltimore County wasn't the only department that took rape victims there. So you had to weed them out too. Give them to other departments. So they were able to get all the list, and then I think it was last year or the year before, they ended up getting a massive grant. All the states were doing it, where they want all rape cases to be to go through the system, but CODIS cases is separate, and they end up getting a separate, like I think they got a separate grant, so they have the money. So the rape cases are now side cases that are left over, which are still a lot, are all over at Baltimore County Police, and the biologists have been prepping them and sending them out. So I think they might have all been sent out, but I haven't heard, because it's a process. It's sent out, then whatever the labs do still has to come back, and then the biologists still have to review that before it can even go to CODIS, up to the CODIS. So you may be getting more. You might get more Alphonso Hill hits. Who knows?
Interesting.
I was praying to get more Thaddeus Clemens hits, but we'll see.
So
they're still
rape evidence. It's handled differently today.
By the time I even went into, I think 2004, it was already starting where don't get rid of the evidence. You just have to find more room to put it.
Store it.
I mean, because literally, I mean, you can imagine hundreds of years. How old's the department? We just had our anniversary. 150-year anniversary. So, and that's our department. So, yeah, they just made a point that you're going to have to save it and figure out, get more space with and they'd have to get money from county council and stuff just to
which is a
make
great
more
thing,
space.
though. I mean,
yeah.
What a difference
because,
that would have made.
And like I said, I mean, when I started doing the cold cases, I actually, one of the guys, he was a lieutenant on the job, and he had gone to the FBI Academy. They send lieutenants and above. And at the end, apparently, of their 3 months or whatever it is, 6 months, they have to do a PowerPoint in front of the rest of the FBI. And the FBI attendees that go to this training are from all over the world, all over the country, all over the world. So he called me one day. I was at my desk, and he said, "Rose," he said, "I'm going to do a PowerPoint with 2 other guys that are here from other departments." And I said, "Can you send me everything you have on the cold case? And I think that's the PowerPoint I'm going to do." I said, "Okay, I'll give you," because we had to develop this. There wasn't anybody for me to ask. So we developed everything you needed to know to how to do a cold case and how to collect evidence and the whole 9 yards and state's attorneys and all that. So I said, and the cold case brochure. So I sent him everything, and I said, "Do me a favor, since you're doing a PowerPoint, at the end, put Sergeant Brady on there and my office number on there." I said, "So if anybody from all these other agencies or whatever have any questions, they've got cold cases that they want to do or whatever, they can call me." So I got a call from a guy in Hawaii, a department in Hawaii, like different departments would call, and I would tell them, where we got the evidence and how we did this. Yeah. And then the one I got was from, I think I've never told anybody this before. I got a phone call from this rape, what it was called, something Hearts, I think. It's who, I can't even pronounce her name, Marissa, whatever her name is, that's on SVU, Law and Order.
Yeah.
She's on the board.
I don't know how to say her
name
either.
I know, I named Harry or something like that. Anyway, it was, because this was in 2004, 2005, whatever, and it was this agency that was starting that foundation that she's a part of to help, to get cases done from departments across the country. So somehow they got my name, and I actually have I don't know if I can find that. I actually have emails I was sending her back, and she called me. I guess she was a producer or whatever, or director of that organization. And she said, "Understand that, like, you know a lot about cold cases." I said, "Yeah, we're doing them now." And she said, "Well, can you give us any suggestions?" Because they were applying for a huge grant from the feds. It was millions of dollars, and it was different. It was going to go to departments that didn't have the money, like we didn't, for cold case. And I said, "Okay." So then I walked her through, these are the cases you want to look for, because the money is a limited amount. Yeah. I said, "So you want to go for, I would advise, go for the stranger cases, because they're not cleared and they could very well still be out there. Pull those first." And I said, and then, because they were going to have detectives assigned to this organization or this committee or whatever. And I said, and then you need your detectives to contact the victims to make sure, A, they're still alive, and B, that they want to go forward with it. Not all survivors want to go forward with it. We had one, and I can't remember, and it was an Alphonso Hill victim. And my detectives, my corporal called her and said, this would help, you could be supporting the other women, let us, we want to charge them with this, and, you're just, it's all, when we explained to this particular woman that, you're not the only victim of this guy. And this is after we had gotten, she had given us the swabs, so because that's how we got the hit.
Okay.
But then when we got the hit, she didn't want anything more to do with it. And it's like, are you kidding me? And I think did he get back on the phone with her? I got on the phone, talked to her multiple times just to say, that you don't have to testify, but it'd be nice to be able to charge him, because we weren't going to be able to charge him if she wasn't going to come up even to be there.
Yeah.
So she was one of the few. We only had maybe 2 that just wouldn't let us. I mean, we were okay because he wasn't, he was pleading guilty to all these other ones. But that's one of the things we learned, and that's when I told her, you got to make sure you're going to have a victim, because in most states, in the state of Maryland, the suspect has the right to, when they're in court during trial, the suspects or the defendant, by that point, lawyer has a right to confront the victim. So, and that's in our state. Yeah. So if you don't have a victim that's going to take the stand or even say that they want you to afford, then, so like I said, very rarely. But anyway, so there was a whole, email that I told her, this is what we learned, boom, 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 boom. Mm-hmm.
It sort of speaks when you're talking about this victim to, I'm sure these women have lived their life looking over their shoulder. I mean,
every single one.
It's impacted everything, their relationships, their jobs, I'm sure. To get justice for these women, how does that feel?
Well, the coolest thing ever was from when Thaddeus Clemens was the first one that we went to trial with. And these women, we did not get this was another thing that didn't happen the one time with Thaddeus Clemens, and after that, it didn't happen again. It was the first, and like I said, I was new to SVU, and I had this judge that I thought was a great judge, and he used to be a prosecutor and used to be prosecuting those kind of cases. And this was, like I said, we have 6 women. We had to actually bring one of the women. She was actually incarcerated out west for, she was one of the few victims we had that did not overcome it, and she ended up being all kinds of problems and ended up in prison, actually. And we brought her because I wanted her to get her I wanted her to see, because this is what started her on her path. Yeah. So we actually brought her up from wherever she was incarcerated so she could get justice too. And I honestly think this judge did not read the case file at all, because we were ready to go to trial. We had all these victims that were going to take the stand. We had the DNA because of the clothing from not all the cases, but that case, as I described Thaddeus Clemens, the MO could not have been anybody else but him. So even the cases that we didn't have DNA, the prosecutors decided they would still charge him with them because it had to be him. So we had a couple of them were that MO cases. And right before the trial started, the judge looks at the defense attorney and said, well, how about will he just plead to 15 years? And our state's attorney, we're like looking, and they're turning around, they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and we've got these, and it's like, what are you talking about? So then the prosecutor and the defense attorney said, well, yeah, I think he'd plead. So it's like, time out. So I never felt so awful. And like I said, this was my first case with being a sergeant in this unit, and this was a horrific one. And I went back with the prosecutors in the conference room with these 6 ladies, and the prosecutor, I felt so bad for him, and he had to tell him that we didn't ask for this because we were looking for life. Yeah. We were literally looking for life, or 60 years, 50 years, whatever. And they had to explain to these women, and I'm sitting there, that we're really sorry. We did not know the judge was going to say this, and we can still put you on the stand and proceed with this trial. The problem is that it was not a jury trial. He was going in front of a judge, and unfortunately, this judge is going to sentence him. And he just said this. So one of the women, and this took me for the 14 years of my career, one of the women who ended up being a teacher, became an elementary school teacher after this happened to her. Like I said, she was in her 20s at the time. And she said, I have been looking over my shoulder for 20 years. I have been in prison for 20 years because I never knew if the guy walking by me in the grocery store, wherever I was the guy that raped me, because I never saw his face. And he's only going to get 15 years, and you know what 15 years means. He's going to go half of that.
Yeah.
So these ladies weren't any dummies. And the only thing the prosecutor, I mean, they were horrified as much as I was. And remember, I came from homicide. You get the death penalty, because at the time when I was in homicide, you could still get the death penalty, or you get life, you know, double life. And I just couldn't believe it. And the best they said to the women, we can put you on the stand, but it's still this judge. And they said, let me see if we can at least, even though the judge already said 15, it's like, maybe let's see if we can get the judge to say like 17, I think it was 17 or 19. So what would you like to do to the women? And they said, just see if you can get 17 years or 19 years, whatever it was. So they went back. And I'll never forget this. This judge never read this case file because, of course, the guy was going to he pled guilty. And then what happens is the prosecutor reads every case. And they're all horrific. It's him. It's Thaddeus Clemens. So you can imagine how horrific they are. And I'm watching this judge's face. And I can just tell he had no idea what he just did. He had no idea. And it was too late. Well, after that, I told the prosecutors, I was talking to and they're good people, they're the best of the best. I said, you have got to educate these judges. I said, I'm sorry. I said, you cannot let this happen again. So they did. They went, and I mean, it's like, you can't tell a judge to do anything, but they educated them because we knew this was the first batch. We knew, we were praying that we were going to be getting a lot more of these cold cases. And they got to understand this cold case was as bad then as it could have been now as a current case. And I think this judge, who was a guy, the only thing I can possibly think is, what was he thinking that it was so long ago, they'll be okay with this? Seriously. Because why would this judge, who was a really good prosecutor himself, ever, but he'd never handled a cold case before, I'm almost positive. So after that, we didn't have to worry about it.
Interesting. What year did you retire?
2017.
And that was after 40 years?
40 years.
40 years.
Only sergeant retired after 40 years, and I'm sure I was the only female retired after 40 years. There's only a handful of us in the whole department history that stayed 40 years.
Wow.
I was just having a good time.
I read somewhere that you were kind of obsessed with solving these cases. Would you call it that?
One of my detectives. When I was in homicide too, recently somebody interviewed one of my retired homicides, and they said, we love Sergeant Brady. And let me tell you, she said, this is on homicide, she said, just go out there and find out who it did, lock them up. That's on homicide. And I'm the kid on the block. I mean, I'm young. My homicide detectives, I'd had on when I went into homicide maybe 19 years. I had some of my homicide detectives that were in homicide for 19 years. I had a great time. They were just good guys, but I told them, it's like, figure it out and bring back. And my detectives, once I went in, and my detective in homicide, I didn't know I was that pushy, but I was. And they didn't care because they wanted to get the bad guy too. It wasn't just me. But they were happy, I guess, to get somebody that supported them, that whatever you need. Yeah. And then when I went into SVU, whatever you need, said find out who it is and bring it back. Because we knew, my detectives were well aware, because I had the guy, we would work multiple cases, and when we would do arrests, I would have everybody in so they could see whether, and it was current rates, stranger rapes. We all understood because of Thaddeus Clemens and then Alphonso Hill. If we got a current case and then we got multiple stranger cases, we had to clear it because we knew they weren't going to stop. Yeah. We knew it. They were not, unless they were incarcerated or were killed. They weren't going to stop.
You really
so that's why I was obsessive, because we knew they wouldn't get to stop.
Of course. Yeah. You never gave up on these women.
No.
I also read that you were described as the Energizer Bunny. You ran on marshmallow donuts and sweet tea.
So when I was in homicide, my guys would get me a large sweet tea and a McFlurry M&M. I actually had one of those on a homicide arrest. I was eating my McFlurry and handed it to the suspect to hold while we put the cuffs on him. But yeah, that was funny. But because in homicide, you could work around the clock. I mean, in homicide, when we got a homicide, it's like you didn't stop until either you made an arrest or we were at a lull. There was nothing right then and there going on. So then we would go home and take a break. Sex crimes was the same way. If we had a stranger rape, we kept working it until we got a lead or whatever, and they're doing all, I don't do anything, I'm just the sergeant. My detectives are doing all the work in homicide and in SVU. So, but I have to stay there because if we're gonna do a search warrant, they're gonna do an arrest or something, or if they have questions or if they need something. So it's like, okay, well, get me a large sweet tea, McDonald's preferably, because that's the sweetest. And then my favorite was when it was really a tough couple days, my detectives would show up with the marshmallow donuts, real marshmallow donuts, not that cream junk. It's like the real stuff that Baltimore has. There's bakeries in Baltimore and in
I've never
Dundalk.
had one of those.
Oh my God. It's like, yeah, and they'd bring me a whole box of them. That would keep me going. Doesn't sound very healthy, does it?
And
but it kept me
you don't
going.
Smoke, you don't drink, you don't swear?
No. And
not your
nobody else,
stereotypical cop.
No, and that's what was so funny because nobody asked me this, you know, and that's on Samantha's podcast, my daughter that put this podcast, and that was true. And the funny thing is, I was a sergeant by then, and there was a young cadet, female cadet, that came on the job, and she's just a really good person. She ended up making rank up until captain, and she actually retired. Everybody retired before I did, but she retired. But when she was a cadet, she was a cadet, I think she had been in narcotics, or I don't know where she was in rank. And all of a sudden, one day she said to me, you know, Sarge, you're like the blue nun. And I started laughing. She said, because you don't cuss, you don't smoke, and I don't think you drink either, do you? I was like, not really. I said, you're like the blue nun. So I was going to write a book someday titled The Blue Nun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Well, and the thing, so I told you about the church when I was an officer.
Yeah.
Well, obviously it followed me because when I was in homicide, none of my detectives, and like I said, most of them, not all, but I think 4 of the 6 are older than me. And they just never cussed around me. I mean, but they didn't normally, most of them. I'm sure they were cussing like a son of a gun when they were out on the street or making their arrests, but never around me. But I never said anything that I didn't cuss. I mean, I don't cuss. But the funniest is when I went when I took over SVU, and when I first went in, I had a mix. I mean, it was women and men, but also they were all older detectives. Mm-hmm. But then I eventually got, you know, younger detectives because people would transfer or retire, and so I got a young crew. And when I say young crew, they were probably in their 20s or, you know, late 20s maybe. And they were awesome. And their office, the detectives were all in one office, and I was, like I said, around the corner around where robbery was. I had my own office. And I'll never forget walking up to my office, and we had just gotten a new detective. He was a robbery detective and transferred over he was in my unit, eventually transferred to robbery. And I hear my detective saying, you know, Chad, if you listen to this because he's still on the job, we don't cuss around our sergeant. And I could hear him. It was the funniest thing. And he's never speechless. And he wasn't saying anything. He was like, you're kidding, right? And they said, no, we don't cuss around our sergeant. I didn't know, and I have girls that are beautiful, you know, and they're like pretty, like gorgeous like you. My girls were gorgeous. I mean, they were the best looking cops, you know, everywhere, anywhere. And they all had potty mouths apparently too. I don't know. Some of them, all but one. And I didn't know any of them cussed because I never heard them cuss. I didn't know that. So we don't cuss around the sergeant. And then he couldn't help himself, so they ended up getting him a cuss box. There was a lot of money in there before he went over to robbery.
That's funny.
Put another $1 in there, Chad. And I'd look at it when I'd walk in, so cuss it again, huh? But I never told any guys and girls that ever worked for me, don't cuss. They just didn't.
And throughout this long career, you had a daughter.
Yes, I had Samantha. And
so you were being this bad A, crime-fighting cop, pregnant, with working mom. I know that's not easy.
And I didn't think it was odd that I would tell her about cases. and I think it was, 2021? 2022. I think 2021. She went to Virginia Tech, got her master's degree in agriculture economics, okay? Cool. Nothing to do with policing. But, you know, her stepdad was a cop, I was a cop, her dad was a cop, and her stepmom were cops, so all Baltimore County. So she
Your
grew
husband
up.
Was a cop?
Yeah, he was a cop. 38 years.
In
he
Baltimore
retired.
County?
Mm-hmm. They were all Baltimore County, yep.
Baltimore.
So, we're all Baltimore County. So she came to me in 2021.
Sorry, just really quick. Can you move your necklace a little bit to the right? Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so and I would tell her, when it was appropriate. I mean, when I was in homicide, she was only 7. So it was waiting until the end of when I was in homicide where she was, all about the crime podcasts and stuff like that, especially when she went in, before she even went to Virginia Tech. I would tell her my stories. And, it was just because she was interested. Yeah. So it's like, I didn't think it was odd. I actually took her on a robbery scene. I was asked to slide over to a liquor store that was robbed, but the bad guys were already gone. Yeah. Her and the neighbor's kid stuck them in the back seat. I said, don't tell anybody, okay? Don't get out of the car. The bad guy's already gone. So this is what my daughter went through, okay? So, and apparently she loved it. She loved it, apparently. So, didn't tell me that till later. So 2021, she had graduated from Virginia Tech, got her master's in agricultural economics. And she came to me and said, Mommy, she got hooked on true crime podcasts at Virginia Tech because she said the dorm was so loud that she had to get her earphones and just listen to something else or she never would have made it through. So she got hooked on these true crime. I had no idea what she was talking about. I said, okay, that's nice. Well, I think we could do one on your career. It's like, okay, what exactly is that again? So she started this Sergeant Brady's crime podcast and in 2021, and she would interview me. And we started right as I came on as a cadet. So right now I'm only to my first 20 years. I'm just getting into homicide because
I noticed. I was like, well, where's the?
Yeah.
You had the Thaddeus Clemens, but there weren't any.
Yeah,
other
and I was
cases.
jumping around a little bit, giving teases, right? But I'm literally, if you look at the dates of where I was, literally she starts with a cadet, and now I'm getting right as I'm going into, and I just did one of my interviews for one of my homicides. It was horrible. Just getting into my homicide career. So I have like another 20 years to go. So I guess her podcast will be fun.
You're good.
I don't know.
Some longevity there.
And that's how, it was fun.
That is fun.
She wanted to do it. I wasn't going to do it. But it was funny because that same year, 2021, was when the chief's office called me and asked, there was a reporter out there, Catherine Rentz, who was doing articles for ProPublica, and it was on Dr. B. And they kept telling her, you need to talk to this retired Sergeant Brady because she started all this and she would know. So the chief's office called me and said, would you please talk to her? So I said, okay. And I was still teaching cold case. I've never stopped teaching cold case. I still teach it at criminal investigation school, and I would teach at the state's attorney's office because I just love this stuff, as you can tell. And I want people to know how to do it and keep doing it. Forensic nurses, I want police officers to know how important this is. So I still do it. And so they came here to interview me. And it started out as Dr. Brightnecker, and how did you do all this? And it morphed into a lot of, I started talking to them like I was talking to you. So they're 4 years into a documentary about Dr. Brightnecker and about the cold cases. And it's just Dr. B and the cold cases, and they interviewed some retired detectives. So they're actually editing it now. But it was the same time period that's so funny, you being a reporter, that Samantha came up with the podcast. And Sam had started the podcast, and then this is happening. So I said, Sam, this is really cool. This reporter wants to interview me about this. And she said, well, Mother, don't tell her about the stories you're telling me for my podcast. It's like,
exclusive.
Okay, I'm not sure how we can do that. But yeah. So Catherine's all based on Dr. B and the cold case. Samantha is obviously my career, and we're just getting into when I went into homicide. Cool. Yeah.
I think this is my last question. I think. Life today looks a whole lot different. Tell me a little bit about this place and what you do in your free time.
Well, unfortunately for me, so I retired in 2017, but Bill had been battling cancer this was his third time that he had gotten cancer in 2017. So instead of retiring and riding motorcycles, because we ride motorcycles everywhere, and riding mules and riding horses and wagon trains, he passed away in 2018. So I went back because the chief at the time asked if I'd come back and do cold cases, continue to do it. So and the only thing to do was, I just wanted to review cold cases. I didn't want my name on anything because now I'm a civilian. And I'm probably the only civilian police officer that came back for free. I was a volunteer. I'm the only volunteer that came back as a police officer. But I didn't want their money. I just wanted to continue with the cases. So I started reviewing cases. And I got the volunteer award like in 2019, and then COVID hit. So that was the end of that. And then they got their own cold case squad, the department, so Baltimore County, so they don't need me for that. But So COVID hit, and I would still, and like I said, I didn't stop anything. I'm busy as all get out because I don't do volunteer. We have a My Neighbors Foundation out here that's to raise money for kids, anything to do from elementary school to the high school, that we don't want kids to go without whatever the other kids go, whether it's scholarships or, participating in sports, the gown, the yearbooks, the rings. So we have a really good network of people called, it's basically Neighbors Helping Neighbors. Cool. So I've been doing that. I'm on that board. Of course, my church, I'm the chairman of that board. It's a small church, but I've been doing mission trips. Mm-hmm. But cool. I didn't have to go on one until I would send my teenagers, my Sunday school kids, as soon as they turned 13, I would send them with the group. But I always, I was always acting lieutenant the week they had to go on a mission trip. And then I retired, and Bill passed away, and then I didn't have a reason not to go. So since 2018, I have now been going on mission trips,
cool.
and we're building houses and stuff.
So you're a Sunday school teacher. So you're a Sunday school teacher.
Well, I was. I mean, my kids are all now their 20s. They're in their 20s, and we're still all doing mission trips together. So I'm actually. You'll never guess what my nickname is on the mission trips. Sarge. Yeah.
I like that.
From all of them, the adults and the kids.
And what about your grandma name? Do they just call you grandma? Your grandson?
My Walter. Yeah, I've got a 6-year-old grandson.
Okay. And he calls you grandma?
He calls me Omi. It's German.
Cute. I like that.
Yes, I'm Omi.
You're German. You knew that.
Yeah. Yeah, and Samantha, my daughter, she didn't go into policing, but she loves the mules and the horses, and they ride, and so they're still into that. So now I travel, grab my mule, Jimmy, and I head down to wherever, Virginia they are. So I go on trail rides. I ride here too. I can go right over to the NCR trail.
You haven't slowed down much.
No, I ride motorcycles, and and then last year, one of my forensic nurses that retired, talked me into, she had been appointed to the Baltimore County Commission for Women. So it's like, I wasn't real big into women's club things. Or actually, I've never joined any clubs. I mean, even motorcycle clubs. It's like, I ride with my husband in his club, but I don't join clubs. And she said, Rose, you really need to apply for that. It's like, well, what do you guys do? And she said, well, it's just like, we really do anything we can for women in Baltimore County, like domestic abuse, getting legislature passed if you need it for like human trafficking. I said, well, I don't know how to say no. It's like, okay, I'll apply, but they're not going to put a cop. There's never been a police officer, I don't think, on this commission ever. And it goes back, I don't know, like 40 years or something, I think they said. So I put an application in, and then I was interviewed by Johnny O's, like, second in command or something. And I could tell, it was a Zoom. And I could tell in the interview, she sounded like she was my daughter's age. So I'm talking to her, and I'm thinking, they're not going to pick me. I was a police officer, right? It's usually not police officers on boards like this. And then all of a sudden I mentioned, well, yeah, my daughter's got this. If you want to know more about me, my daughter's got this podcast, Sergeant Brady's Crime Podcast. You're kidding. I love crime podcasts. Well, my 20-minute interview went to 45 minutes, and then at the end she said, you wouldn't believe how many people I've had to interview for this position. She said, and you're my just absolute favorite interview. It's like, okay, thanks, Samantha. So then Johnny O appointed me, so now I'm on the Women's Commission.
Okay.
County. So it's not like, I'm never home. If you ask my neighbors or my friends, you're never home, because I'm always doing something.
That's okay.
It is. Keeps your mind intact.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.